The night fell upon the city like a heavy velvet curtain, soft, silent, and suffocating. The towering glass of DNV Enterprise shimmered faintly against the glow of streetlights, its reflection stretching into the darkness below. Inside the top floor, the world seemed to pause. The hum of machines and the faint rustle of papers were the only sounds that dared to exist in the same room as Ethan Delville. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped behind his back, the faint reflection of his own eyes burning back at him from the glass. His expression was calm, but his thoughts stormed like thunderclouds. Behind him, Pete entered quietly, holding a tablet and a folder marked confidential. "Mr. CEO," Pete said carefully, placing the folder on Ethan's desk. "The audit team sent their report on the anomalies from last quarter. You might want to see this." Ethan didn't turn immediately. "Anything unexpected?" Pete hesitated. "Yes. And no. Which one is it, Pete?" Ethan's tone was sharp, controlled, as though every syllable was weighed before it left his lips. "The trail we thought ended with Secker. It doesn't. There's someone else. Someone inside the corporate chain still moving funds, rerouting through shell accounts." Pete's voice lowered. "Whoever it is, they know DNB systems too well. It's an inside ghost." Ethan finally turned. The faint light from the city traced the hard angles of his face. "Show me." Pete tapped the tablet, revealing a complex flow of transactions, millions disappearing through cleverly disguised medical procurement contracts. Ethan's eyes scanned the screen, cold and precise. Bell's scholarship accounts were linked to these, Pete added quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, silence swallowed the room. "So," Ethan said softly, "they're still playing with fire." He leaned over the table, his hands resting flat against the polished surface. "Someone wants to challenge me through Bell's name. Through my grandmother's legacy." Pete nodded grimly. "And the trail ends at K University's internal finance division. There's a name you might remember, Gwen Stanton." Ethan's eyes darkened. Gwen, the daughter of the former director he had terminated, a girl with arrogance in her veins and vengeance in her heart. "She's not working alone," Pete continued. "We suspect she's being funded. Anonymous wire transfers from offshore accounts. Someone powerful." "Powerful," Ethan repeated, his voice a whisper that seemed to thrum through the air. "Powerful is relative, Pete. There's no power without control." Pete watched him carefully. "What do you want us to do?" Ethan turned back to the window, watching the faint pulse of the city lights. "Keep surveillance on the Stantons, both father and daughter. If they're planning something, I want to know before they even breathe the thought." Pete nodded. "Understood." A knock came at the office door. "Enter," Ethan said. Mitch, the chief aide, stepped in carrying a sealed envelope. "Sir, this just arrived from the medical division. It's Miss Bell's full diagnostic report." Pete froze. Ethan's eyes flickered, just a subtle movement, but enough to change the atmosphere in the room. "Leave it," Ethan ordered. Mitch placed it on the desk and exited swiftly. Pete's gaze lingered on the envelope. "Do you want me to?" "No," Ethan interrupted. "I'll handle it." When Pete finally left, the room fell silent again. Ethan sat behind his desk, staring at Bell's name printed neatly on the envelope. For the first time that evening, his expression softened. He picked it up slowly, his thumb brushing over the seal before breaking it. The paper rustled as he read through the medical report. Each line seemed ordinary until his eyes reached the final section. His pupils constricted. Genetic anomaly detected. Sequence inconsistency with parental lineage. Further analysis recommended. Ethan froze. His heartbeat slowed, heavy and deliberate. It took him several seconds before he set the paper down, his expression unreadable once again. "Parental lineage," he murmured. "Impossible." The phone on his desk rang sharply. Ethan answered without hesitation. "Sir," came Pete's voice on the other end. "I just received intel from the board's private channel. You need to see this." Ethan's tone was deadly calm. "What now?" "They've called an emergency assembly. Tonight. Someone's contesting your last executive decision, claiming you've personally violated governance protocol. It's coming from the same group that backed Secker." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Then it begins." 2 hours later, DNV Executive Hall. The boardroom buzzed with low murmurs as directors and legal advisors gathered. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew what it meant when Ethan Delville was summoned to defend a decision. When the doors opened, silence swept the hall. Ethan entered, his presence commanding instant stillness. Pete followed closely, his expression cold and wary. At the center of the table, the acting board chairman, a silver-haired man named Arthur Creed, adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Delville, we appreciate your attendance on short notice. I assume it's important," Ethan said coolly, taking his seat. Arthur folded his hands. "There have been allegations that your intervention in the terminations of Mr. Secker and Mr. Supp violated the board's oversight policies. It's claimed you acted unilaterally." Ethan's gaze was sharp. "Unilaterally," he echoed, almost amused. "Gentlemen, DNV's charter was written by my grandfather. My authority isn't borrowed. It's inherited." A few members exchanged nervous glances. Arthur leaned forward. "Even inherited power must be accountable, Mr. Delville." "Then by all means," Ethan said, leaning back, "hold me accountable." The words landed like thunder. Pete's eyes flicked toward the projection screen where new evidence appeared, an anonymous email addressed to the board, attaching supposed classified documents showing Ethan's direct override of board security protocols. Arthur's voice was calm, but his hands trembled slightly. "Do you deny authorizing these actions?" Ethan's eyes scanned the documents, a faint smile curving his lips. "I don't need to deny what I have the right to do." Arthur frowned. "And what of the missing funds tied to the EDV Medical Center accounts? Are you claiming no involvement?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I protect what bears my name, not steal from it." There was a pause. Then the door at the far end opened again. A young woman stepped inside, confident, graceful, eyes glinting with quiet defiance. Gwen Stanton. Every head turned. Ethan's stare hardened, his gaze following her every step as she approached the board table. "I believe the board deserves to hear the truth," Gwen said, her voice steady but laced with venom. "About the real reason my father and Mr. Supp were terminated." Arthur hesitated. "Miss Stanton, this meeting concerns my family's honor," she interrupted, "and I will not stay silent." Pete shifted uneasily. Ethan remained motionless, his expression carved in stone. Gwen turned her gaze to him. "You ruined their lives because they refused to sign your silent expansion contract, the one that transferred K University's equity to DNV's research wing." Murmurs broke out among the board members. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Miss Stanton." "Or what?" Gwen snapped. "You'll do to me what you did to them." For the first time, Ethan stood up, his presence towering and cold. The room seemed to shrink around him. "I don't destroy people, Miss Stanton," he said quietly. "They destroy themselves the moment they betray what they were entrusted with." Gwen's defiance faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "Then you won't mind if I show them what your own system's hiding," she said, pulling out a small flash drive. Pete moved instinctively, but Ethan raised a hand, stopping him. "Go ahead," Ethan said softly. "Let's see what truth you think you found." When the projector lit up again, the entire room gasped. The files displayed confidential health data, Bell's medical report, including the genetic note Ethan had just read hours earlier. "Mr. Delville," Arthur's voice trembled, "this report claims Miss Bell's lineage doesn't align with yours. This implies—" But before he could finish, Ethan spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" His tone was low, dangerous, final. Gwen froze. The air in the room thickened. Pete's voice broke the silence. "Ethan!" Ethan's hand lifted slightly. "No!" His gaze shifted to Gwen, cold, sharp, and glinting with something unreadable. "You made your first move, Miss Stanton." He took a slow step toward her. "Now," Ethan said, his voice almost a whisper, "prepare for mine." The lights flickered once, then twice. The projection screen went black. And in that darkness, the shadow of the Delville legacy stirred awake once more. The lights hummed back to life one by one, a sterile white that filled the boardroom with cold, surgical clarity. Gwen stood rooted in place, her breath shallow, her eyes darting between Ethan and the men at the table. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. Ethan Delville stood at the head of the table, tall and composed, yet every inch of him radiated restrained danger. The silence pressed like a weight against every chest in the room. The hum of the ceiling lights sounded louder than usual, their flickering reflection sharp against Ethan's cold eyes. Pete stood to Ethan's right, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed forward. He knew that tone, he'd heard it before. Years ago. In another room. Another crisis. And every time Ethan used that tone, someone's fate was sealed. Gwen tried to speak, but her throat betrayed her. Mr. Delville, I didn't mean. Ethan raised a single hand, silencing her. You did. He turned slightly, his voice smooth but glacial. You underestimated who you were sitting with. You thought you could challenge a Delville in his own house. The faintest smirk curled his lips, devoid of warmth. You've made a bold choice, Miss Stanton. Let's see if you're ready to live with it. Phil, standing beside his father at the far end, lowered his gaze, uneasy. He had seen Ethan's wrath before, once, in a closed meeting where a senior executive had lost everything before the clock struck noon. Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. He simply decided, and the world obeyed. Pete, Ethan said quietly. Pete straightened. Yes, sir. Have IT send me everything on Stanton Holdings. I want their accounts, acquisitions, every donor tied to them, and a full background on her father's offshore branches. Yes, Mr. Delville. And Pete, Ethan added, eyes flicking back to Gwen. Keep it discreet. No one outside this room hears a whisper of it. Pete nodded, his expression unreadable. Gwen swallowed hard. You can't. Ethan's gaze snapped to her. I can. And I will. He took a slow step closer, the soles of his shoes clicking softly against the marble. You brought a storm to my doorstep, Miss Stanton. Now you'll learn what it means to be in its eye. For a moment, it looked as though he might say more, but instead, Ethan turned away, his composure impeccable. He reached for his jacket on the back of his chair, slid it on with mechanical precision, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. The door closed behind him, the quiet click echoing like a gunshot. Outside, Ethan's stride was measured and silent as he walked through the private corridor leading to his office. His phone buzzed once, he ignored it. His mind was already moving faster than any report, piecing together timelines, motives, and connections. Belle's name flashed across his thoughts for a moment, grounding him. Not now, he told himself. Not yet. By the time he entered his office, Pete was already waiting with his tablet. Data's coming in, Pete said quickly. IT's tracing Stanton Holdings' digital footprints. They've used multiple shell corporations across Singapore, Zurich, and Luxembourg. Ethan leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. That's sloppy for someone who thinks they can challenge me. Pete exhaled. It's not Gwen, Ethan. It's her father. She's just the bait. Ethan's jaw tightened. I know. That's what makes it personal. He walked around the desk, his gaze fixed on the city skyline outside the glass wall. Rain clouds had begun to gather, thick, dark, and rolling low over the towers. Do you remember what I said, Pete? Pete looked up. That the Delville legacy doesn't bow? Ethan's lips curved into a faint smirk. No. That every move has its consequence. He turned back toward Pete, eyes glinting. And now we collect theirs. Later that night, Delville Estate. The mansion stood in silence, the night air heavy with the scent of rain. Belle sat curled on the couch in the grand living room, a soft blanket draped around her shoulders. The TV flickered quietly in front of her, though she wasn't really watching. When Ethan finally entered, his presence filled the space instantly. Belle turned, her face lighting up with a gentle smile. You're late. He sighed softly, pulling off his jacket. Meetings ran long. You mean wars, Belle teased, watching him cross the room. Ethan smiled faintly, lowering himself beside her. Something like that. She studied his face, the faint tension around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he thought too much. You've been fighting again. Defending, he corrected quietly. There's a difference. Belle leaned closer, her voice a whisper. Does it ever end? Ethan looked at her, his expression softening for the first time that day. Not for people like me. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. But for you it should. Belle smiled, her eyes warm but full of unspoken worry. You say that as if I live in a different world, Ethan. You do. And yet I'm here, she said, resting her hand over his. In yours. For a fleeting moment, the storm in his chest quieted. He pulled her close, the warmth of her body dissolving the weight of the day. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. At the same time, Stanton residence. Gwen sat on her father's private balcony, the wind whipping her hair into her face as she stared at the city lights below. Her father, Richard Stanton, poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter. "You provoked him," he said flatly. Gwen didn't answer. Richard took a slow sip, his eyes narrow. "Do you know what Ethan Delville is capable of, Gwen?" Her hands tightened around the railing. "He's not a god. He doesn't have to be," Richard replied, turning toward her. "He just has to be right. Once. And the world bends." She turned sharply. "Then maybe it's time someone broke that bend." Richard's lips curved faintly. "Careful. You sound like me." "I learned from you," she shot back. He chuckled softly, then placed his glass down. "Then you know this. If you're going to fight a Delville, you don't aim to win. Then what do you aim for?" "To survive." Their eyes met, a flicker of shared defiance passing between them. The next morning, D&V Enterprise. The elevator doors opened to a storm of activity. Staff hurried back and forth, murmuring updates, clutching folders, whispering names that didn't belong in a public building. Pete intercepted Ethan near the executive lounge. "Sir, overnight data poll confirms 3 offshore subsidiaries under Stanton Holdings that directly fund K University's scholarship endowment." Ethan's brows furrowed. "So that's how they've been embedding influence." "Yes, sir. But that's not all." Pete handed him another file. "One of the shell companies, Arcvale Solutions, transferred funds last month to a consulting firm that handled the whistleblower reports against EDV Medical Center." Ethan's hand froze mid-turn of the page. Slowly, his eyes lifted. "They financed the attack." Pete nodded grimly. "Indirectly, yes." A slow, dangerous smile touched Ethan's lips. "Good." Pete frowned. "Good. It means they've drawn first blood." He placed the file down and straightened his tie. "Now we bleed them dry." Evening, private jet hangar. The jet's engines hummed softly as the crew prepared for takeoff. Ethan stood by the entrance, speaking quietly with Pete. "You're sure about this?" Pete asked. Ethan nodded. "New York holds more than a contract signing, Pete. Stanton Holdings has their largest partner there. I'll find the route. And Belle." Ethan's gaze softened, just for a moment. "She stays here, with your man on her side. No exceptions." Pete hesitated. "She won't like that. She'll understand." He glanced out toward the runway, where lightning flickered across the distant clouds. "When I return, this game ends." Pete watched him board the jet, his figure framed against the stormlit sky. A silhouette of power, vengeance, and resolve. As the jet lifted into the clouds, the rain began to fall, heavy, relentless, and cleansing. And somewhere in the dark, the legacy of Delville stirred again, hungering for war. The sky over Manhattan was bruised with cloud when Ethan's jet touched down. Dawn hadn't yet broken. The city glowed in muted gold and silver, a restless beast stirring from sleep. The engines of the jet wound down as Ethan stepped onto the tarmac, his expression unreadable, his mind already miles ahead. Pete's voice echoed faintly in his ear through the earpiece. "Your security team has the car ready. I'll keep you updated on Belle's schedule today." Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his voice calm, but layered with quiet steel. "Keep her surrounded. No one gets near her without your clearance." "Already handled," Pete replied. "You just focus on the contract signing and on Stanton Holdings." A shadow of a smile curved Ethan's lips. "Oh, I intend to." He climbed into the waiting black Maybach. The car rolled smoothly through the nearly empty streets, passing towering skyscrapers whose mirrored windows still wore the faint blush of night. Ethan sat in silence, fingers resting on his chin, thinking. Every piece was moving now. Stanton Holdings had dared to reach into his empire, and he had come to their city, their home turf, to end it. Delville Tower, New York branch, 7 a.m. The office was already alive when Ethan arrived. Assistants hurried with trays of espresso. Screens flickered with stock data, legal briefs, live media feeds. The moment Ethan stepped into the lobby, silence fell like a ripple through water. "Good morning, Mr. Delville," murmured the front desk manager, bowing slightly. Ethan didn't respond. He simply walked toward the executive elevator, flanked by 2 of his men. When the elevator door slid shut, his reflection stared back at him in the mirrored walls. Calm, perfect, dangerous. He had inherited his grandmother's eyes, sharp, intelligent, and ruthless when tested. The world thought the Delvilles built an empire on business acumen and innovation. They were wrong. It was built on fear, precision, and the unbreakable rule: never let them strike twice. As the elevator rose, his phone buzzed. Pete again. Ethan, we got something new. One of Stanton's offshore channels was traced to a fund used to bribe a board member at K University. The man was paid to fast-track Secker's expulsion case. Ethan's eyes darkened. Names! A certain Lionel Verne. Retired now, but records show payments continued even after his resignation. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then we pull him out of retirement. Already done, Pete said quietly. He'll be at the Delville Tower by noon. Good! The elevator chimed softly, and Ethan stepped out onto the top floor. 12:06 p.m., private conference room. Lionel Verne sat trembling in the high-backed chair, the city skyline looming behind Ethan like a wall of judgment. The man's hands shook as he clutched a folder to his chest. I don't know what you've been told, Mr. Delville, but I've done nothing wrong, Lionel stammered. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the polished table. His gaze was calm, but the air between them carried the static of a brewing storm. Mr. Verne, he said softly, you accepted 3 wire transfers from Arkvale Solutions. Each one, just under 7 figures. Coincidence? Lionel's throat bobbed. It was consultancy work. Don't insult me. Ethan's tone sharpened like a blade. You sold integrity for pocket change. You jeopardized students' futures, damaged my grandmother's legacy, and thought no one would notice. Lionel's eyes widened. I didn't know it was Stanton. Exactly. Ethan's smile was razor-thin. And you're going to tell me everything he's planning. Lionel's lips trembled. He hesitated for one fatal moment too long. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Because if you don't, Mr. Verne, you won't have a life left to retire into. The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain tapped faintly against the glass wall behind Ethan. Then, slowly, Lionel began to speak. Later that evening, Delville Penthouse. Ethan stood by the glass, staring at the skyline, whiskey untouched on the table beside him. The lights of New York glimmered far below, each one a life, a choice, a consequence. Pete's call came through again. Verne talked. Stanton's moving money through a front called Crescent Vale Foundation. It's his political shield. The next step, Ethan, he's trying to buy influence in the Senate Subcommittee on International Trade. Ethan turned his gaze toward the reflection in the glass, his own, shadowed and cold. Then he's not just attacking me. He's attacking the Delville Reach. Exactly. What's your move? Ethan's lips curved faintly. I'll make him choke on his own ambition. He picked up his phone and made another call. Celine, prepare the New York board for an emergency session. Midnight. Understood, Mr. Delville. And Celine, Ethan added, invite Stanton Holdings. Send it through the usual diplomatic channels. I want Richard Stanton at that table. He hung up and turned back to the window, eyes narrowing as lightning forked across the clouds. The game had changed. What began as a corporate feud had become something older, deeper. The Delville name had been tested before, but never by someone foolish enough to challenge it in its own bloodline city. Meanwhile, back in the capital, Belle sat in her art studio, a quiet space filled with sunlight and scent of paint. Her phone buzzed on the table, screen flashing Ethan. She smiled softly and picked it up. You made it safe. Yes, his voice came, low and steady through the line. You sound tired, she said gently. Too much work again. A pause. Not work. Just balancing ghosts. Belle frowned faintly. You mean business ghosts or personal ones? The kind that wear suits and play gods, he murmured. She laughed softly. Then be the bigger god, Ethan. He smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. That's exactly what I intend to do. Midnight, emergency board session, Delville Tower. The room was filled with quiet tension. Executives, lawyers, and corporate heads sat in near-perfect rows, their faces pale under the cold fluorescent light. At the far end sat Ethan, posture relaxed but eyes sharp. Opposite him, Richard Stanton. The older man had the composed arrogance of someone used to commanding attention. His tailored suit gleamed subtly, his cufflinks engraved with the Stanton insignia. "Ethan," Richard greeted with an oily smile. "Quite the late meeting you've called." Ethan didn't return the smile. "I believe it's time we stop pretending this is business, Richard." Richard leaned back. "Isn't it always? You've been funneling influence through my foundations, using my university, manipulating my hospitals. Tell me, did you think I wouldn't notice?" Richard's grin widened slightly. "You Delvilles think you own the world. I simply rented a piece of it." Ethan's tone chilled. "You trespassed. Business is trespass, Ethan. The strong take, the weak whine. And the dead," Ethan murmured. Richard's brows lifted faintly. "What?" Ethan stood, slow and deliberate. "They stay silent, and you're about to join them, in legacy if not in body." He turned to the board. "Gentlemen, as of tonight, Delville Holdings will withdraw every existing partnership and all joint ventures and dissolve the funding pipeline shared with Stanton subsidiaries. Effective immediately." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard rose sharply. "You can't." Ethan's gaze cut through him. "I already did." He placed a folder on the table and pushed it forward. "Those are your company's offshore accounts. Frozen, pending international audit, and the regulators will be receiving a copy within the hour." Richard's composure fractured. "You!" Ethan stepped closer, his shadow falling across the man's trembling form. "You tried to ruin my family's name. You used your daughter as a pawn. You insulted my grandmother's legacy. That was your last mistake." He turned and walked away, leaving chaos behind him. As Ethan exited the tower, rain lashed the city streets. He walked slowly through it, unbothered by the cold. Each drop hit his face like absolution. Pete's car pulled up beside him. "It's done," Pete said quietly through the open window. "Stanton's empire will start collapsing by morning." Ethan nodded once. "Good. Let him watch what happens when a Delville decides to remember." He got into the car, his gaze distant as the lights blurred past outside. For the first time in years, he felt the echo of something old, his grandmother's voice, her warning when he was young. "Power isn't what you hold, Ethan. It's what you can take away." And tonight, he had taken everything. Meanwhile, back at Delville Estate, Belle couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the wind play across the garden. She didn't know why, but a chill had settled deep in her chest, as if something had shifted in the world beyond her reach. She whispered into the night, as though he could hear her across the ocean. "Come back soon, Ethan." But somewhere far away, high above the storm clouds, Ethan Delville's plane cut through the darkness, and the war that had begun would soon reach even deeper than either of them imagined. The night was a living thing. Thunder rolled across the Atlantic sky as Ethan's jet sliced through clouds heavy with rain. The world below was hidden, but his thoughts were wide awake, racing, sharp, dangerous. He sat alone in the private cabin, the dim lights washing his face in gold. A file lay open before him, photographs, contracts, coded transfers, all pointing to the same source. Stanton had not been acting alone. Pete's voice broke through the hum of the engines. "Satellite confirmation came in, Ethan. Crescent Vale's last transfer went through a shell in Lagos. From there, to an unregistered fund in Dubai." Ethan didn't look up. "Name!" "That's the thing. It's not under Stanton's control anymore." Someone else stepped in. "A partner." Finally, Ethan's eyes lifted from the page. "Who?" "We're still tracing, but whoever they are, they've got access to your internal filings from the Geneva archives. It's someone who knows your systems from the inside." Silence filled the cabin. Ethan leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. The air felt colder now, not from altitude, but from realization. "Then the breach didn't start with Stanton," he murmured. "It started with us." Delville Estate, 2 days later. Belle woke to the sound of the sea. The horizon was pale blue, soft with morning mist. She stepped out onto the balcony in her silk robe, wrapping it tightly around her as the wind carried the scent of rain. She'd barely slept since Ethan left. Every hour had felt stretched, uneasy. There was a strange stillness to the estate, like the air before lightning strikes. Down below, she saw 2 black SUVs rolling up the drive. Pete stepped out first, followed by 3 of Ethan's security detail. Her heart quickened. She didn't wait. She ran downstairs barefoot. "Pete!" she called, her voice echoing through the marble hall. "What's happening? Where's Ethan?" Pete looked exhausted. His usual cool expression was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his eyes ringed with fatigue. "He's on his way," Pete said. "We've had complications." Belle frowned. "Complications?" Pete hesitated, then handed her a folder. "You need to see this." Inside were printed emails, stamp reports, and a headline from a New York financial journal. Delville Holdings under internal investigation. Audit leaks confidential files. Belle's hand flew to her mouth. "No!" Pete's tone was low. "Someone sold out the company from the inside. Ethan's trying to contain it before the markets open in Geneva." "Who would do that?" she whispered. Pete's silence was answer enough. 3 hours later, Geneva headquarters. The Delville building stood like a monolith of glass and steel, its mirrored walls reflecting the mountains beyond. Inside, chaos reigned. News feeds buzzed. Lawyers shouted into phones. Executives scrambled to bury damage. When Ethan walked in, everything stopped. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger. But the room seemed to tighten around his presence. "Status," he said. Celine handed him a tablet. The leak hit the boardroom files, internal memoranda, offshore accounts, pending acquisitions. Whoever did it had administrative access. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Which department?" Celine hesitated. "Financial oversight. Level 4 clearance. Only 6 people." Ethan's tone was lethal. "Names. Alan, Trevor, Sophia, Malik, and myself." Ethan looked up, eyes sharp as glass. "And the 6th?" Celine swallowed. "Gwen Stanton." The silence cracked like ice. For a long time, Ethan didn't move. Then, slowly, he closed the tablet. "Find her." London, Stanton Holdings headquarters. Gwen stood by the window, watching the Thames shimmer under the setting sun. Her reflection in the glass was composed, but her heart was pounding. Richard Stanton paced behind her. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I've done what was necessary," Gwen said quietly. "Necessary," Richard snapped. "You've just turned Delville Holdings into a hornet's nest. Ethan Delville will come for you." "He already did," Gwen whispered. "Now it's my turn." Richard stopped pacing. "You're not doing this for the company, are you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Good God," Richard said, almost laughing. "You're doing this for him." Gwen turned to face her father. "He destroyed everything I worked for. He humiliated us. You taught me never to lose twice." Richard's voice hardened. "You'll lose your soul if you keep down this path." Gwen's eyes glinted with something cold. "Then I'll trade it for victory." That night, Ethan's suite, Geneva. Rain streaked the window like silver veins. Ethan sat in the dark, the city lights reflecting in his glass of whiskey. Pete stood across from him, waiting. She leaked at Ethan. "Gwen Stanton." We confirmed her credentials were used to access the internal server. "The trail leads straight to London." Ethan said nothing. His jaw flexed once, then stilled. Pete exhaled. "You want me to send a team?" Ethan's voice came low like thunder. "No. I'll go myself." Pete frowned. "You sure that's wise?" Ethan rose, buttoning his jacket. "She made this personal. I'll return the favor." He started for the door, then paused. "Have the London office prepped." "And Pete?" "Yes." "Lock down all communication channels. No one contacts Belle. She doesn't need to know any of this." Pete nodded grimly. "Understood." London, 24 hours later. The rain hadn't stopped. The city pulsed with restless energy, cars, horns, lights in constant motion. Ethan's car cut through it like a black phantom, silent, deliberate. At 9:32 p.m., he stepped out in front of Stanton Holdings. The building loomed like a fortress. Inside, Gwen was waiting. The elevator opened on the top floor. She stood before the wide window, her back to him. The skyline burned with light. "You found me," she said softly. "I wasn't looking," Ethan replied. "You made yourself easy to find." She turned slowly, her face calm, almost serene. "You think you can intimidate me, Ethan?" "I don't need to," he said. "You already know what I'm capable of." Her lips curved faintly. "You still think this is about revenge?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Isn't it?" She stepped closer, voice lowering. "No. It's about truth. You built your empire on lies, on what your grandmother stole from mine. Ethan's voice cut sharp. My grandmother built this empire from ash. Yours sold her loyalty for power. That's what you were told, Gwen said. But the truth is buried in your archives. The Delville legacy isn't as pure as you think. For the first time, Ethan hesitated. What are you talking about? Ask your grandmother's trustee about the Valmont deed. The name hit like a blade. Ethan's composure cracked for a single second. Gwen saw it and smiled. You see, even you didn't know. Ethan stepped forward, fury controlled but burning. If you're lying, then prove me wrong, she whispered. But when you find the truth, Ethan, you'll realize we were never enemies. The rain outside thundered harder, drowning the silence between them. Ethan stared at her for a long time, then turned and walked away, leaving the echo of his footsteps and the scent of rain behind. Back at the estate, the same night, Belle's phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Pete. Belle, you need to stay inside. Don't go anywhere. The situation's worse than we thought. What's going on? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. Someone breached the estate security system. We're locking down the grounds. As he spoke, the lights flickered. Then darkness. Belle froze. Outside, in the garden, something moved. And far away, on the other side of the storm, Ethan Delville had just opened a door that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his family, his legacy, and the woman he left behind.